You're listening to the Illuminated Ally, a podcast about tapping into the unfiltered voice of enlightenment. Each week, we are pulling back the veil with no chaser to step closer to the INNERstanding of yourself and your gifts. So when times are dark and life just doesn't make any sense, tap in with your go-to psychic transformation specialist to tackle the ins and outs of spiritual evolution. This isn't just a podcast, it's an enlightenment. I'm your host, Teaira, the Spiritual Valkyrie. Listen up. Welcome back to another episode of the Illuminated Ally. And again, I'm your host, Teaira, and let's just hop right into it. Okay. This week, we're going to be talking about boundaries. And not just talking about boundaries, what they are, whatever the case may be. It's just more about boundaries and how they play a role in our life on a spiritual level, physical level, emotional level, mental level, etc. So one of the things that has been coming up a lot lately that I've been noticing within my own clients, my own life, and just like friends and family is that we're not really paying attention to our boundaries in ways that we can find that sense of connection to them versus just having them in order to avoid something, if that makes sense. There's a spiritual component to respecting our boundaries and knowing what they are and being able to really connect with them on a deeper level. And I feel like now that there's a lot of information out there that's in the mainstream population and social media, just around boundaries and around being able to really hold them. I sometimes feel like we kind of get stuck in this cycle of utilizing boundaries as a way to stop doing things or to move forward with them, if that makes sense. Now, I am going to say this. We all look at our boundaries in different ways, and some people lack boundaries. Some people don't lack boundaries. Some people are aware of what they are, and some people are unaware of what they are. So you find, yourself in spaces where you've been tested to respect your own boundaries as well as to respect other people's boundaries. And one of the things I do want to talk about in this is gaslighting in our boundary setting. Sometimes we tend to hold a boundary and then we're gaslit into feeling guilty of holding that boundary. We're gaslit into feeling like that boundary was a wall or that line that we drew in the sand, And so sometimes I see this in my clients. I see this in a lot of different relationships is that, because someone lacks the respect for someone else's boundaries, they gaslight that person into feeling like their boundaries are not actually boundaries. They're just ways of disrespecting someone else, or they're ways of feeling like we're in a space that really puts us in detriment of the relationship. And I'm going to be real with y'all. The reason why I'm really for real talking about this is because a lot of people are struggling with this. And a big issue is that there are people who do what we call project psychic attacks. And I've seen enough of them to witness the extreme consequences of putting out a psychic attack and also it being blocked and being sent back to sender. So one of those things that I noticed with this was that, I always feel like there's people who have the luxury of being unaware. But at the end of the day, it's not very much a luxury. It's just the awareness comes with, when you know better, you do better. Or the awareness comes with being able to recognize when something is a projection versus it being something that you actually are taking on, even though we are experiencing our lives every day through the lens of our internal world, and everything externally is reflected back to us. Okay, so everything that's going on in your internal world right now is being reflected back to you because that's what's happening internally, whether we want it to be that way or not. And this is why I come talking about boundaries, is because when we have certain relationships, when we have certain experiences and interactions with people, we find ourselves recognizing there's patterns. And a lot of those times the patterns is that you're not holding your boundaries. You're not, you don't even know what they are, and I always feel that boundaries are pretty much the lines that create our freedom. When somebody crosses your boundary, when you cross somebody else's boundary, when you don't hold your boundary, it's not necessarily a limitation. It's more so something that brings you more freedom when you respect it, so when you don't do it, then it's actually creating more of an energetic cycle that's kind of passing through you, and it's going to be a violation. You know how the people in the hall, they have their hall pass, like the hall pass monitor, and they're like, violation. I just think of that little person being the inner you that's going to create more and more boundaries for yourself. And somebody once told me that they felt like they were holding boundaries, but people just weren't respecting them. And because they kept going through the same thing over and over again, they felt like it was just a mere sign of people not respecting their boundaries. But instead, it actually was that this person really didn't respect their own boundaries. And they also was using them as walls and weapons at different times. You get what I'm saying? So when you use your boundaries as a weapon, this is where a lot of gaslighting comes into, to play. But then you can also find that using your boundaries or respecting your boundaries and acknowledging your boundaries is the weapon against psychic attacks. I'm going to say that again. Using your boundaries, acknowledging your boundaries, respecting your boundaries is literally a weapon against psychic attacks. And psychic attacks are a result of someone not respecting your boundaries, not respecting your space, not respecting, their your ability to hold onto your boundaries and stand strong with them. And there's a difference, when you use your boundaries as a wall. I truly believe that using your boundaries as a wall is a result of violation of your boundaries multiple times, to the point where you're traumatized so much that it's now limiting versus freeing for you. And yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about that. That is one of the things that I've struggled with that before, and I felt like, boundaries were supposed to be what protected you. And they do to an extent, but we actually have a lot of control. You got to realize when your ego is a part of this, when your ego is impacting the results. And a lot of times our ego is the result of people throwing psychic attacks. Like, you can throw a psychic attack and it's out of anger. It's out of rejection. It's out of jealousy and envy and just like hatred. Like, these are strong emotions that when experiencing them from somebody else, especially someone who's an empath, when you experience that from someone else, like, these psychic attacks can be very strong. And we are spiritual beings. We have to realize that even the mere thought of something really strong against someone else can send them a psychic attack. And I work in the realm of dreams. This is what I do all the time. And so I see this a lot when people deal with their stuff in their dreams. Okay. You'll start seeing like there's entities or there's dark energies around somebody in their aura, and it shows up in their dreams. There could be somebody who's like literally trying to do something to them in their dreams, or they're running from something, or, there's only so many different things that you can kind of anticipate when somebody's throwing a psychic attack. There are certain telltale signs, and a lot of that is a violation of boundaries. A lot of that is a violation of boundaries. A lot of this can be, when you're, like I said, when you're using this as a wall, when you're using your boundaries as a wall to kind of gate you away from, like, quote unquote, protect you. And I'm saying, quote, protect you from other people and their, quote, negative energies. Because we all have some type of negative energy. We do, whether you're being in the light or not, or you work in the light or not. we have shadow sides. We have things that we got to work on. That's why I don't really consider myself like a light worker. It's just I work in the light, but in order to work in the light, you must be able to understand the dark. You have to. You have to. That's one of the things. So whether you are someone who works in the light or not, you also have things that you should work on. And you have a level of darkness that you need to tap into as well, too. And that is where a lot of this gray area, this like gray space that allows the attacks to come in starts to show up. That's just what happens, you know? And so, when you don't process your emotions, when you don't look at, you know, how you handle things or what the triggers are and how it's coming up for you, you begin to use your boundaries as walls. There's always the lighter side and the darker side of all the stuff that we do, whether you're practicing safe boundaries and you're practicing safe containment and protection. Like there's dark and light sides to all of it, you know, and I really like to talk about how I can help in that situation as well, too. Like these are things that I like to talk about is like, how can you tell when you're using them as walls versus using them as weapons? How can you, you know, determine if this is just a reflection of what's going on internally, or if it's a test that you need to pass, you know, or if it's both, you know, you never know. And so when we deal with our relationships, when we deal with our situations at jobs, work, family, friends, partners, dating, all of the above, like we gotta realize there are certain things that we need to look at, dark and the light, around how we even gaslight ourselves, how we gaslight other people, how we, you know, we cross the boundaries. We cross the boundaries. So that's one of the things I'm like, you know, I can go on my little rant about that. But at the end of the day, it is a matter of being able to recognize psychic attacks, being able to recognize your boundaries and not think that, oh, it's just everyone, you know, is disrespecting my boundaries. It's also a part of you not being able to truly infuse with the boundary itself. Why does the boundary exist? It's not to stop you from fearing things. It's more so to, you know, respect yourself. And a lot of times we don't do that. Like, I really feel that our walls are created when we've violated our boundaries way too much. And a lot of it's not always our fault, you know, to not have awareness of what our boundaries are, to even uphold the boundary itself. It's more so just about like learning about it and being able to be like, you know what? Okay, this is a lesson I had to learn. This person's duty in my life was to teach me this lesson. And now I have to move forward. Now I have to go forward. Now I have to like understand that it is about my ability to become a free individual through the work of me truly respecting my own boundaries. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. We are let's see, I'm currently recording this in June of 2024, and we are in a universal 5 month. This is, and I'm speaking in the terms of numerology, we're in a universal 5 month, which is a month of change, month of gratitude and freedom. Like 5 is the number that means that you're probably going to have to start expecting the unexpected. You know how some people on Instagram, they're like, yeah, I didn't expect to check this one off my bingo list. That's literally what 5 energy is. It's like you have a bingo list, you have a plan that you probably created last month. And then, you know, 5 like switches the whole thing up. You know, 5 is all about breaking out of constraints, which is where 4, last month, you probably seen that there was like different things around our foundation and limitations that we recognize, but 5 is all about breaking free from those and adventure, exploration, really kind of getting into the space of like seeing what happens, being adjustable, being adaptable. And that's all fun and dandy and everything. But like, you know, at the same time, 5 can bring so much unexpected change that, you know, it does require a level of boundary setting, as like, and this is what I mean, like, you know, our boundaries are the lines that create freedom. And a lot of times we tend to run away from those boundaries. That's what, like 5 energy, there's nothing wrong with it. We tend to run away from those constraints that we feel like are constraints. But in reality, it's like 5 kind of brings attention to how to utilize these quote unquote constraints into the space of us being very adaptable and free at the same time. Now, I brought this information up just because I'm seeing this with people in the energy right now that it's hard to adjust. And that means with our boundaries, some boundaries are going to have to be adjustable. Not because somebody else told you to, but because you are changing, you're growing. And what you required before is not what you require now. And that's one thing you're going to have to recognize. And people are going to have to recognize that about you. And if they don't, then you just move on. But if they do, then it's like, okay, I respect that this is something that you didn't necessarily need before, but it's something you need now. And I'm more so speaking in like relationships as well too, like any type of relationship, friendship, family, partners, etc. And so a lot of it is going to be about being your authentic self and adjusting and adapting to the changes that are coming to you. Your boundaries can change. Your boundaries actually need to change. And so a lot of times when we are in that space where we've created the walls, it's because we are changing, but we're sticking to the same boundary that we once had when they needed to change. That boundary needed to change. If you're someone who was like, I don't like when people cut me off, and your boundary is, when having a conversation, like, don't cut me off or whatever, like it's probably not going to happen. You know what I mean? Pet peeves are not boundaries. Like, pet peeves are not boundaries. You need to understand the spiritual component of your boundary. The spiritual component of your boundary requires you to understand or understand that with spiritual alignment and spiritual growth, the lines shift, the structure shifts, and it is required of you to respect that shift in yourself, or you will consistently be in violation of your own boundaries and the boundaries of other people. This is like a serious thing that I like to talk about. And I'm probably going to have to do a second episode around it. But this is where psychic attacks start to come in. This is where people start sending that negative energy towards you. And because you haven't respected the shift in yourself, you're vulnerable to being attacked psychically. You're vulnerable to these energies like attaching to you. You're vulnerable to these things and you didn't even know it. Why? Because you're sticking with the same boundary that worked for you before, but it doesn't work for you now. It doesn't work for you now, and once you start to realize like, oh, I need to shift everything. I don't need to just shift my body, my mindset, my energy. Like, I need to shift my relationship to my boundaries along with my own growth so that I can use my boundaries as my weapon against psychic attacks. Or my boundaries are now like aiding me versus hurting me. They're not walls, they're aids, and so there's just so many things with that. And one of the things I will say is that it's required for us to do this. Absolutely required for us to do this. We are supposed to learn as we grow. Now, if you want to know exactly what a psychic attack can look like, I'll give you a few things right here. If you're under a psychic attack, you most likely have come into contact with someone. And a lot of times, again, if you're feeling like, especially people who are very sensitive, if you're feeling like someone's angry with you, they probably are. I don't like gaslighting people into thinking that their emotions are not valid or what they're feeling is not valid. But I also, at the same time, want to acknowledge the fact that some of the things that we pick up on with other people, we have to be able to decipher if it's us or if it's somebody else. And a lot of times it is us. A lot of times we're feeling some of the things that we're processing at the moment, and it's coming through as like somebody else may feeling that about us. That doesn't mean that they don't feel that about us, but it just means that we have to actually take a look at ourselves. Now, with that being said, when you're having a psychic attack, there could be, you could physically be exhausted all of a sudden. You can feel it, depending on how sensitive you are, you can feel it in your body. You can literally feel this in your body. I just helped a friend of mine who was going under a psychic attack. And this is also part of the work that I do. So Not only, like I said, if you listen to my first episode, I talked a little bit about me being a psychic medium and a psychic transformation specialist, but this is one of the things that I do is like, and I call it my Valkyrie work. So I am the spiritual Valkyrie. And so this is something that I'm very protective, especially over people that I care about. But energetically, I can go through and see if there's entities. I can go through and see if there's like negative spiritual energy connected to you in a sense that is foreign, meaning that it's not from you or you didn't project that or generate it yourself. And I'm able to really do a lot of work with your guides and ancestors along with my guides and ancestors in universe to remove it and alleviate that space. Also, it's just like kind of sending it back and transmuting it into a lighter energy. Now, if you're under a psychic attack, you're going to feel all of these things physically. If you're spiritual, or if you don't even have to be spiritual per se, but if you're sensitive, you will feel the shift. You will feel like yourself, the emotions that you're carrying may not be your own emotions. You may feel really bad about yourself or blocked or stagnant or just not really creative at times. You may feel that you're in a space of like depression, or you may feel like things are kind of crashing down around you and that the people and the relationships that you have are kind of crashing down with you. And so you're probably like, okay, I can feel these things. What's the difference between that being like me and what is it and it being like a psychic attack? If something significantly shifted within a certain time frame, meaning that you may have come across somebody and after coming across them or other people, you started experiencing all of these things. That's an easy way to pinpoint if it's a psychic attack and you can pinpoint who it comes from. But then other times it could be, say you posted something on social media and it's a nice, beautiful picture or video of like how you're just doing your thing, you're living your life, you're living great, or you're just smiling and happy and like someone really is not liking that. Like that, you can get a psychic attack through that. Or say you're helping a friend who may be struggling at the moment. They may be going through some things and it could be with their partner. And so as you're helping your friend outside of them in their relationship, you're helping that friend. That partner may not be liking that because the person's elevating and they aren't. So they may actually send a psychic attack to you. And you'll start feeling that. You'll start feeling like, depending on how sensitive you are, sometimes you'll get dreams. Sometimes you'll feel it physically. Sometimes you'll see it in your mind or like have like these intrusive thoughts that just don't belong to you, So there are different ways to like kind of notice your psychic attack. And when I talk about this, it's like, you really want to make sure that you hold on to your boundaries because it's your boundaries that are going to create this line that provides freedom for you. And it's also going to be the weapon against these psychic attacks. Now, how do you use your boundaries as a weapon? This is one of the things where I'm very clear with, universe, higher power, God, around my own boundaries, because I have boundaries around how much information I can take in when I'm doing sessions. I have boundaries around how much is thrown at me at once, when I'm doing any type of psychic work or anything of that sort. But this is where you become very clear in what it is that you're looking for. You need to express yourself from a higher space, not from the current space you're in. If you're undergoing a psychic attack, it is extremely hard to manifest or to shift this energy from the current state that you're in. So it takes a lot of work to tap into the higher state of yourself and what that higher self wants for you so that you can create boundaries based off of your higher self, not your current self. If you are basing it off your current self, again, you're not shifting and adapting, which is what you need to do. You need to start shifting and adapting into that higher state so that okay, my higher self actually wants me to create this particular boundary, whatever boundary it is. And this is what I'm going to start speaking out into the universe. I'm also going to speak this to my guides and angels to help me create this boundary and hold on my boundary. So these are things that you gotta think about. These are things you gotta think about. Whenever we're trying to manifest, whenever we're trying to do some work, it has to be out of the space that is required for us to shift into a higher frequency. If we're not doing that, it's really hard to do. It's really hard to do that. Also, you can use help. If you're feeling like you're undergoing a psychic attack, or if you're just feeling stagnant in any of your work or things that you want to do in your life and you're just having a hard time understanding some of this, then yes, go ahead and give me a call or visit my website. Okay. So, which is all linked in my description below. But I really help a lot of people with like shifting this. This is why I specialize in transformation. It's like you need to shift, you need to move. And sometimes we need that stagnant energy a little bit just to recognize that our boundaries were in alignment to us at the time. It once was, but it's not now. You know, so are you using your boundaries as a weapon, or are you using them as walls? Are you constantly violating yourself to where you traumatize your body into believing this is protecting yourself versus it being a weapon against like things that are not in your best interest and highest good? These are things you got to ask yourself. These are things you got to look at for yourself. And the more you take time to look at yourself in this sense, the easier it will be for you to align with yourself through your boundaries and acknowledge yourself through your boundaries. We're not doing any psychic attacks over this way. We're not even trying to have it, but every day someone is getting a psychic attack thrown at them. And whether you're doing it to someone else or you are having it done to you, it is happening very frequently. And a lot of times we are gaslighting ourselves into believing that, you know, it's because people are disrespecting our boundaries or that our boundaries aren't valid or anything of that sort. Like, recognize that there's a good amount of work that has to be done in order to realize if your boundaries are aligned for you. Or if, you know, your external world is reflecting the lack of boundaries you have for yourself. So, yeah, a little bit of something there and there, but we are going to talk more and more about this because I feel like this is a strong topic to talk about. So let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode, and let me know exactly what it is that you want to discuss a little bit more. Give me some examples, some things that you maybe have gone through, and let me know how I can help in that sense, because I am the Illuminated Ally and the Spiritual Valkyrie, and this is what I do, okay? This is what I do. But if you are interested in getting a reading on my podcast or getting your dream interpreted on my podcast, go ahead, click the link in the description box, and you can check it out at www.queenswithlitdreams.com. You can go to the Illuminated Ally podcast and fill out a form to let me know if you're going to need some assistance from moi. And yes, be safe. Hope y'all learned something from this podcast episode, and join me next week. All right, I'll see you all. Thanks for joining us this week on the Illuminated Ally. You can also follow me on all social media platforms at Queens with Lit Dreams. If you love the show, please leave a rating so I can continue to bring more episodes that you love. If you enjoyed this experience and want to personally check it out for yourself, visit www.queenswithlitdreams.com. As always, subscribe to the show, leave feedback on what you want to hear next, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.